And our distinguished presenter is Professor Abhay Pethe, a former Dean, Faculty of Arts. He's a senior academic who currently holds the Dr. Vibhuti Sukhala Chair in Urban Economics and Regional Development in the Department of Economics at the University of Mumbai. He has written 2 books and has published extensively in reputed journals, books, and magazines. He has been a member of several official government committees concerned with providing policy advice on wide-ranging issues. He has worked and continues to work as a consultant to private sector organizations as well as governmental organizations such as Government of India, Government of Maharashtra, MCGM, MTSU, Planning Commission, Finance Commission, Reserve Bank of India, and international organizations such as the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, the World Bank, and UDNDP, UNCHS, among others. So we're very pleased to have him today as our presenter. He will be broadcasting out of Mumbai. Let me give you the presentation, and then we'll go straight to Professor for the presentation. After the presentation, we will then go to a series of structured questions, ask all of our participants for your feedback, and then we'll go to open questions. So the presentation summary. The presentation begins by providing a backdrop of the status and nature of urbanization in India. It then underlies the unique position of the Mumbai region as an economic and financial powerhouse of Maharashtra and India's economy. In particular, it points to the substantial contribution by Mumbai and to the state and central government's revenues, thereby laying a foundation of the goose that lays the golden egg argument. Thus, it argues for greater investment by higher levels of governments for infrastructure provision in the region. The extent public investments by all 3 tiers of government in the region are shown to be rather low. The presentation focuses in greater detail on the finances of urban local bodies and briefly discusses trends in non-urban local body public investments such as centrally sponsored schemes and investments by state and central parastatals. It comments on the nature of public-private partnerships for infrastructure provision in Mumbai. Further, the presentation dwells on the huge challenges facing Mumbai, specifically related to land governance, the problem of slums, and provision of affordable housing. Finally, the presentation highlights the issues in metropolitan governance, which is the key to providing the situation in Mumbai region. I think this presentation complements very well our presentation from 2 weeks ago with Anwar Shah in grant financing. So without further ado, we're very pleased to have Professor Abhay Pethe from Mumbai. Over to you, Professor, and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Victor. Now, let me begin by, first of all, laying a preamble or some kind of context to what we are discussing. Indians always believed that India's future was rural, and even today some people believe that. But there has been a perceptible mindset change wherein people have started believing, all the stakeholders, including importantly the policymakers, have started believing that India's future is urban. It is pegged at about 31%, this latest census, but that's a serious underestimate. And a couple of years ago, the World Bank World Geography Report already estimated it at around 50% or more. Now, the new trend that we are seeing is that there is a growth in smaller towns and cities. Amongst them are census towns, which are the largest constituents, which are urban in all characteristics, except that they are not declared as urban and therefore they are not administered in an urban fashion. Now, all these smaller towns and cities largely are at a small proximity or a small distance from the metropolitan kind of mega cities. And therefore, we are finding that there is a metropolitanization of urbanization in India, and they are recognized as the economic drivers now that they are contributing to more than about 65 to 70% of the national GDP. Now, the nature of fiscal federalism in India, which is the backdrop, India always had this union with a centripetal bias. Our constitution makers firmly believed in granting overwhelming powers to the federal government. But that is changing. There is increasing assertion by the state governments because of the fractured polity, coalitional governments, regional leaders amongst national parties, and regional parties coming up in a big way. We further have had 73rd, 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts, which essentially give our constitutional validity to the third tier of government, so that now India's fiscal space is 2+. However, this is constitutional. De facto, this is not the case. Decentralization, which inherently believes in the 3 Fs, functions, finances, and functionaries, and of course the autonomy, is not happening in a de facto sense. The lower tiers of governments continue to be seen as creatures of the state, which is a legacy overhang. And therefore there is inadequate devolution. Mind you, there are grants, but these grants essentially are political pork barreling, and they are ad hoc. The state finance commissions, which are supposed to make these awards, most states, including Maharashtra, never ever accept any financial kind of recommendations, which leads to unfunded mandates. Let me provide a brief overview of Mumbai metropolitan region. Apart from the size that is mentioned here, it is a densely packed kind of space. Greater Mumbai has an approximately 30,000 persons per square kilometer densities. And the predominance of Greater Mumbai, not only in terms of population, but also its economic importance, can be seen very easily. 33% of the provincial or the state GSDP, 4% of the national GDP comes from this particular region. Whether you talk of financial things like the stock exchange, offshore banking, banking transactions, or even ports and passenger traffic and so on, it's essentially a financial powerhouse, and it's termed as a financial capital of the nation. Now, there's a huge source of tax revenue, and that is buoyant. That is up to 70% of the state revenues, and the central 10% and more of the central government's revenues come from this particular region. Admittedly, there is a slight overestimation here because the back offices, the head offices are here, but actual production has takes place elsewhere. And yet, this continues to be a buoyant source of tax revenues, which will then lay the foundation for the golden goose argument. That is, it would appear that the higher level government should then start thinking in terms of investing in this particular region to a far greater extent than they do, and nurture this region so that they themselves gain from it. But that's far from truth. Let me turn to the public investments in MMR. And these are, of course, the urban local body or ULB finances, which can classically leverage the revenue surpluses. But since ULBs themselves are pretty weak, that's not a big source of finance. The other sources are, there is a centrally sponsored scheme, a major flagship program, the JNNURM. There are international donors, non-public investments, and public-private partnership. We will briefly look at each one of this in what follows. The urban local body finances. Currently, there are 8 municipal corporations and 9 municipal councils in this region. Data, and this is something that we have found across the project of that book that Victor mentioned, is hard to come by, especially in a neat and a comparable format across, as well as across time, as well as across space. But every 5 years, we have a finance commission set up which calls for this data, and therefore the data reported here is slightly dated. What you find is that the size of the ULBs in this economy is about 5.5%. This is atypical, because typically ULBs in India are about 1% of the economy. But this is largely because of MCGM, the Mumbai city, which is 2 districts, Mumbai city and Mumbai suburban, administered by MCGM. So in what follows, the categorization is we look at MCGM, we look at other municipal corporations, and then the municipal councils. Municipal corporations are slightly larger municipal bodies. Municipal councils are smaller. They are categorized further into A, B, C types, all depending on population size. We'll look at the expenditures and revenues. Expenditures first. The revenue expenditure is largely committed, it's the establishment, salaries and so on. It's the capital expenditures which deal with projects and could be looked at as investment expenditures. If you look at these graphs are per capita capital expenditures and per capita revenue expenditures. If you look at them, you will find that MCGM's capital expenditures per capita are increasing very rapidly, most rapidly in fact, compared to the other two. Unfortunately, the revenue expenditures are also increasing equally rapidly for MCGM. The other metropolitan council, municipal corporations seem to be doing fairly good, and of course the smaller councils don't have any other way but to cut down on their revenue expenditures. But what these graphs show is that MCGM has an overwhelming share in the MMR expenditures. Per capita revenue and capital expenditures are rising, so there is no evidence of economies of scale. Of course, this does not mean that there is some technical inefficiency necessarily, because we know that if you have metropolitan cities of large sizes, then the amenities and services are qualitatively and quantitatively, because of the aspirations of people there, are higher, and they call for higher expenditures. Essentially, MCGM revenue expenditures to total expenditures is much higher than other categories. So we've not been able to, MCGM has not been able to really economize on that. When you look at the revenue sources, of course you have the traditional revenue sources, own source, own tax, own non-tax, grants and borrowings. We'll again go through each one of them quite briefly. The predominant tax revenue that we have is the octroi, or the entry tax into the city. This is a bad tax. I mean, there is a consensus amongst economists that this is a bad tax and it has to be done away with. But probably Maharashtra is the only state and Mumbai is the only city which has it. The problem is, of its huge budget, 50% of its revenues come from this tax. So it's not easy to let go. The good tax, which is the property tax, is not very buoyant. It's only about 20% We've gone into reform now. We've moved away from the rateable values to the capital value taxation, and therefore the jury is out whether that will lead to any buoyancy here. You can't increase taxes in Mumbai because already the tax burden, if you consider the central, state and the local taxes, is to the tune of around 40%. So we have a situation here where octroi, which has to go, but it can't go because it is a huge revenue. Property tax is good, but it's not very buoyant. Implications of the repeal of the octroi are currently being debated, and probably we'll talk about this more later. Now, the grants are devolved by the State Finance Commission, but this is only in theory. As I said, State Finance Commission financial awards are never accepted by the state government. Therefore, grants are only ad hoc, and that doesn't do well in terms of planning and so on for the local bodies. Central Finance Commission has been playing a greater role of late, and it is now recognizing, as it should, that this is a third tier of governance and there should be a devolution. There are constitutional issues, so what they have done, of course, is that out of the devolvable tax pool, they have now for the first time put in a certain amount of percentage which comes down, so that there is a buoyancy that is transmitted. Earlier, finance commissions used to give an ad hoc absolute amount of grants, and they have moved away from that, which is a very good thing. There are inefficiencies, of course, in devolution, because constitutionally the finance commission grants go to the state and then further down. So there are delays and so on, but slowly I hope we will get away from this. The smaller ULBs, of course, continue to have higher dependency on grants to the tune of almost 50%. The bigger ULBs are much less dependent on grants, only to the tune of 5%. The borrowing capacity of ULBs is quite low. And they have to take permissions. They don't have autonomy in terms of taking exposure to financial institutions. The problem is that even this small capacity is not being exploited by the local bodies. The centrally sponsored scheme, the JNNURM, was launched in 2005. This has two components. One is the big ticket, which deals with huge projects, trunk infrastructure, etc. And the other is the BSUP, which is dealing with the basic services for the urban poor. The good part about this is that there is some amount of administrative arm twisting that happens here, so that the local bodies which are very close to the people are forced to undertake certain kinds of reforms. The Mumbai Metropolitan Regional Development Authority is the nodal agency, and there is a structure of payments that the finances are to be done. This particular source comprises about 15% of the total public capital investments in MMR. Note that the public capital investments in MMR are only to the tune of 12% of the total investments. So again, there are about 88% of private investment that is happening. Smaller ULBs find it very difficult to raise the revenues of this 50% that is required, of course, and something needs to be done. As far as international donor agencies are concerned, World Bank has been around for quite some time, whether it is slum sanitation programs, whether it is the sites and services programs, and so on. MUTP is the latest that they have been involved with. There are inefficiencies and coordination issues and delays in loan repayments. There are 40 different authorities that are in play here, so it's a governance conundrum and a chaotic situation. Recently, and this is a good thing and this hopefully will increase, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency has come in a big way to finance the Mumbai Trans-Harbour Link, the Delhi Metro Industrial Corridor, and the Metro in Mumbai. The non-ULB public investments are mainly by state government-owned parastatals. Prominent amongst them are MMRDA, and then there is MHADA, the Maharashtra Housing Area Development Authority, the Maharashtra State Road Development Corporation, and so on. MMRDA, of course, does not have its own funds. It has certain amount of land which it kind of sells and translates into money, which it then leverages by getting into PPP kind of mode. Most of the other parastatals put in very little of their own money, but try to use the PPP way. PPP has been discussed for very, very long time. Only recently you've started seeing some successes in the private public partnerships, because there has been a long-standing mistrust between the public and the private partners that have to come together. What we do is we set up a special purpose vehicle here, sometimes referred to as SOEs in America. And then you have a viability gap funding, normally structured in a 70-30, that is the debt equity ratio, and a concessionaire agreement of about 30 years. Smaller ULBs lack capacity to negotiate PPPs, and this capacity building is being done by creation of a Mumbai Urban Infrastructure Development Committee Limited, which is again an SPV led by the government secretaries. So if you look at the MMR balance sheet, of the total requirement that has been estimated, that is put up here about $45 billion, there has been very little investment, and that too not necessarily in what the business plan wanted it in. The public investment, as I just mentioned, is only 20% of the total investment that has taken place in this region. The ULB investments and the non-ULB public investments are half-half. The latter includes JNNURM. The actual investments or capital expenditures are approximately, one could put at 1/3 of the required by the business plan. So the problems here. We have affordable housing and slums, which is a huge problem. Almost 45% of the people live in slums in Mumbai city alone. As you go further out, there are less and less slums. There is a gentrification with a voluntary twist that is happening here. People are moving outwards because of the peculiar huge asset bubble in real estate markets. There is a lack of affordable housing because FSI, which is a planning tool, unfortunately is being used as a source of revenue, and that's why I put it here. Just like FSI is being used not in a granular way it is done in the other cities of the world. I'm not talking about it being really strictly raising tool, which is what it is being done, and that is bad. And what has happened is, therefore, you find that large houses are being built, there's real estate that is being created, but not for the segment of the affordable section, not for the even which is the optimal solution given the environment, is that of slums. The slums are on all over the place. 40% or more of these slums happen on private lands, the rest on public lands, but these public lands are of course not necessarily the MCGM lands. We'll see that a little bit. Multiple policies, right from eradication to coming to a situation where you want to uplift or improve, to sites and services, to improving the slums. We've gone through the whole gamut of solutions, and various policies are at play. The recent most policy is the RAY, the Rajiv Avas Yojana, be going under. It already started, but nothing on the ground yet, which talks of in situ development of slums wherever possible. And it started by talking about slum-free cities, but they have reduced their ambitions by saying that we want better provisions or better amenities for slums, which is possibly a doable thing. Underlying all this, of course, is the land market. And the land market and the land governance is in a terrible situation. And we've got distorted land markets, development control rules are horrific, there are supply concerns, some artificial, some because of topography. Data on who owns which land simply does not exist. Managing these public lands for raising revenue for infrastructure financing, you're not even able to locate these public lands as belonging to central parastatals or state governments, so on. There's huge amounts of rehabilitation is a problem. There is a collusion that is happening between builders' lobbies and the will go for a toss, and you will find these kinds of informal, beyond the shadow of law kind of things happening, which get entrenched into the system, which is what is happening. Our pro-poor policies are having unintended outcomes. The rent control has had a terrible outcome, that we have killed off the investment in rent control, in rental housing. The Urban Land Ceiling Act, which was at the height of our socialistic fervor, did not work. It was repealed, it did not work. The supply of land which was supposed to come and have a downward impact on the prices simply did not happen. We found that in fact the prices continued to go up. So land governance is, I think, a very, very important thing. Finally, metropolitan governance, which I believe is the key. There are 40 different authorities that are existing in this particular area that are at play, apart from the ULBs. And these authorities are from the central parastatals, the state level parastatals, the sectoral kind of parastatals. Thing, something that people like Elinor Ostrom and others, Maginnis and others actually proposed and said that this was the way to go for metropolitan governance. Unfortunately, because they are only ostensibly polycentric and the agents and the agencies have incentives which are institutionally determined, which are so poor that it only leads to destructive conflicts and power games being played out. So the question is, should we have a monocentric system with one big government with an elected, empowered? Currently, our mayor is not empowered, only a ribbon cutting person with a red beacon on the car. It's the commissioner who is nominated by the chief minister who runs. Level, should we have an empowered mayor at the ULB level and then allow the ULBs to be empowered and through revenue handles and so on, so that they become autonomous and then they are able to cooperate or compete with other ULBs and serve the metropolitan region better? This is an open question which is being debated very hotly. CPR in Delhi, the Center for Policy Research, is doing a lot of research in this particular area. So in conclusion, MMR is better in terms of growth, in terms of human development, in amenities and service deliveries, as far as relatively speaking to other parts of Maharashtra, the provincial state, or even India. The incomes in MMR are about twice incomes anywhere, the national average. But there is a long way to go, especially because we keep on talking about, rather aspirationally, of making Mumbai a financial center, international financial center, and Mumbai a world-class city. From that point of view, infrastructure investment is the numero uno issue. You know, I talked about 88 and 12% kind of breakup into private and public sector investments. There is no real data on that. This was a benchmarking that I did with some ingenuity, I hope, and really the private sector using the bottlenecks and innovating and still continuing to invest a little bit and allowing this area to grow at about 9% plus is to their credit. But I think we are coming to the end of that kind of innovation possibility. The bottlenecks are going to start showing up as it's already happening. The sheen of MMR region is going down. Other regions in the country, whether it is Bangalore, whether it is in Karnataka, or whether it is Hyderabad, whether it is the national capital region, all of them are scoring heavily. Even within MMR region, Mumbai is losing its sheen, and there is this movement out. Policy reforms on land markets especially is absolutely essential and key to creating affordable housing for the poor and getting rid of slums. Effective decentralization that we keep on talking about, it's been discussed ad nauseum but never really invited in. If we are able to do that with a strong political will, which will require some amount of statesmanship, which unfortunately is lacking today, we will be able to achieve our vision of livable, bankable, attractive investment destination, and MMR region can then really become an economic powerhouse and the goose that continues to lay the golden eggs. Thank you very much. I hope I've kept myself in time. Now we can move on to some questions. The questions that are supposed to be by way of icebreakers. What is the best way to financially empower urban local bodies in MMR? Now, we have 4 different multiple answers to this, whether it should be untied formulaic devolution from higher governments, whether we should allow free access to capital markets of financial institutions for borrowing. Increasing efficiency of revenue collections, of course, is to be expected, but that's not going to take us far enough. Augmentation of revenue sources. For example, in MMR, you have vehicle tax, entertainment tax, professions tax, local do not happen to be in the local bodies ambit. They are all collected by the state government and a little bit is passed on to the local bodies. So I don't know what you think. I'm not able to see all the down, please.
Yes, Professor. So as it turns out, the untied formula evolution from higher government scored 46%, and the second one
absolutely great. I find that the allowed to free access to capital markets only 15%. I would have thought that would go higher, but I think the China experience is what is leading to this. But I'm very happy that untied formulaic devolution from higher governments is scoring almost half. And I entirely agree. The problem is like devolution, which is untied kind of a grant, giving up of power. In a place like MMR, which is contributing about 33 if we are able to bring that much money or resources without questions to MMR metropolitan level, the person running MMR will become probably more powerful than the chief minister. That's the only reason why it's not being done. Let's get on to the second question. What is the best way to replace the lost revenue from octroi or city entry tax? Mumbai almost went on to this suggestion. Personally, I was supposed to do some work for the MCGM, but I thought that local business tax is not such a great tax. It's much better to have a surcharge on state level VAT and then pass it on. The fear that the BMC people or the MCGM people expressed is that once the state government collects these taxes, they don't necessarily send it. But we have the Gujarat experience where what they've done is they have kind of automatically, with the help of banks, sent it off. So it doesn't get into the consolidated fund of the state. But that's good. What is the best way to replace?
For the second question, Professor.
Yeah, it is, what is it? I can't see it, Victor. I can only see the first two.
The question is, what is the best way to replace lost revenue?
No, I can see that. I can't see the last two, how much they have scored. I can see that surcharge has scored about 18%. Right. But I don't know what the improved collection of property tax has scored and what is the highest.
So the number one answer is improved collection of property tax scored 62.5%. Number one by far. Second, compensatory devolution 12.5. So those are the top two. Property tax more than 62%.
Yeah, well, that's great. That is in conformity with what the one particular Subodh Kumar led committee had recommended. My problem is property taxes are pegged at around 20 to 24% currently. The octroi is giving you about 50%. In order to compensate, you will need the revenues from property taxes to treble. Even with reforms, and with 50% of households kept out because they are on slums, it's going to be a tough task. Except that we are thinking actively, that is the MCGM is thinking actively, thanks to JNURM conditionality of, putting on some kind of a property tax even on slums. So once that happens, but even then I'm rather skeptical whether it can lead to trebling of property taxes. We will need some other revenue like some surcharge on VAT at the state level. Let's look at the third question, which is the most effective way of solving affordable housing problem in MMR. And the choices are policy reforms to encourage rental housing, that is cut down on the rent control and gradually kind of get rid of it. Inclusionary housing via regulation, something that the state government already has done. It says that any building that will happen will be 20% will be for affordable or smaller kind of units. Public housing, which is direct intervention, for which we have authorities. Unfortunately, they don't have too many resources and they don't have too much of land left. So the only way they can do that is by increasing the FSIs in that particular region. They don't themselves build, they ask the private contractors to come in and redevelop the particular thing. But in situ development, which is incremental, which is the sites and services, as I said, the problem, this seems to be something which is very, very important. I was reading just 2 days ago an interview by Shlomo Angel where he said that let's do this, let's just give property rights on land to the people in the slums. The problem is that these rights are not there to be given by MCGM because it's not their land, and land is a state subject. And there are lands by Port Trust and the railways, which are central entities. So unless governments at all levels say this and are ready to give this kind of thing where you do the incremental development at in situ, of course leaving aside the unsafe places and endangered kind of places environmentally and otherwise, of course there you will have to resettle them elsewhere, but in situ is fine in principle. There is just one problem, that it gives a learning of trying to kind of do something illegal, because after all slums are illegal encroachments. Of course, I know that there will be a whole lot of people who will talk about right to city and so on and so forth, and that seems to be the way it's going, But fine, I accept this. I don't think in situ development is likely to happen. Incremental development in some places can happen, the sites and services way. It was unfortunate that World Bank, after doing what I thought was success stories in Bombay, then made a policy decision not to get involved with projects but only with policies. But why the government did not learn from the sites and services and did not on its own do that kind of a thing, I would never know. But this is striking. I mean, it tells me that the people around are rather radical in their thinking.
Thank you, Professor. I have we are getting many questions from our participants. May I suggest we know the specific questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're sure. You're running it. Yeah.
No, not at all. But we have some very good participants from all over the world, every continent represented. One first question from Shriya Bhatia is how much dependency exists on external multilateral bank funding in financing infrastructure in MMR? You touched on it briefly, so if you could just give us a little bit of an insight on that.
For the big investment projects, it's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, remember, you see, it is all within the 12% of the total investment that is happening in MMR. So it's about 6% of the others, which means that the multilateral would be about 5%, 5 to 6% of the total investment that is happening in MMR. That's it. But it is only specifically addressing one or two major projects. That's where it's coming in for the MUTP. But I wouldn't think it's more than about 6% of the total investments happening in MMR. If you consider the private kind of investment as well. Within the public investments, of course, it might be about 40%.
Thank you very much, Professor. Juan Rivas is asking a question. Do you make, or does MMR make cost-benefit analysis of the PPP proposals? Is cost-benefit used as a tool?
Of course, they must be doing it. I am not aware of it, but I am aware of one thing, and that is generic, not just about MMR. I am involved with MMR to some extent, doing some work with them, and of course, they do contract cost-benefit analysis, etc. Are they very good at it? I doubt, but that is a generic thing. A major problem with complex proposals today is, like most other things, public sector undertakings, including MMR, lacks in the capacity to write complex contracts. And that is where the ultimate outcomes of PPPs are seen to be favoring the private sector. And that's why starting yesterday, going into tomorrow, we are having huge amounts of almost roadblocks that are going to be created in Mumbai region because of the toll that has to be paid for various roads that have been built under the PPP. So the perception of the people is that it is always done in favor of the private sector. I'm not sure it's done intentionally. I think as you grow in complexity, the capacities to write complex contracts simply does not exist with the public sector. So they do, of course, cost-benefit analysis and everything. And that's how they project the concessionary period and the tolls that have to be collected, etc. But the outcomes always seem to be favoring the private sector.
Thank you very much, Professor. And we have some rather good analysis and publications globally on the PPPs, and we'll put those in the Q&A sections for everyone to look at. It's a very good work that was done some years ago. The next question is by Richard Tomlinson. What JNNURM reforms has the Maharashtra state undertaken for Mumbai? What 74th CAA subjects has the state devolved to the MCGM? And there's another side question. You can, please go ahead.
Hi, Richard. Yeah, well, Mumbai MMR region and Mumbai in particular has taken the mandatory reforms. That is, they have undertaken an accounting reform so that the budgets are started to look much better and much more understandable, with the caveat that budgets of municipalities are always very difficult to understand compared to central government and the state government budgets. But that's a reform that they have undertaken. They have, of course, the state has repealed ULCRA, the Urban Land Ceiling Act. They have started moving towards the e-governance, which was not properly understood by most of the ULBs. They thought it involved buying computers and hardware and software rather than the systems. But it has, Mumbai municipality as MCGM has moved fair bit in terms of e-governance. It's moving in terms of data digitalization and record digitalization, and they're also moving in increasing the coverage, which was a mandatory reform under JNNURM, of spreading the property tax regime to cover all properties, legal or illegal, which have a special footprint within the MMR.
Thank you very much, Professor. And a question again on PPPs, but with a different twist from Mujahid Hussain. What is the future of PPP in Mumbai municipal development? And we can relate this to land acquisition. Is land acquisition create problem in capital investment projects, and does PPP aspects help in or become more cramped with regards to land acquisition?
You know, PPPs which will involve land acquisition in around Mumbai is going to be very difficult henceforth, because there is on the anvil a land acquisition bill at the center. We have moved the pendulum from one side to the other. You see, earlier we said that there were all these big money bags which were doing land acquisition by stealth, and for various reasons which they didn't want to actually do, they only wanted land. From there, to rectify, we have switched over to such a regime now under the land acquisition, which requires people to pay about 4 times the market value of the land, plus ensure an annuity, plus ensure all kinds of other things, and not only for people who own land, but people who are affected by. So there are all these clauses which people in the government and for any PPP. On the existing land, if you wanted to do a big trunk innovatively of how to even do better in that PPP mode. But land acquisitions in and around MMR are going to be very tough. Especially because now the civil society, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, I mean the civil society has stepped in a big way. It has a big presence, so that the vulnerable fringe living semi-urban kind, semi-rural, semi-urban of people could be taken for a ride earlier can no more be taken for a ride. So they will get their compensation. The problem is that the compensation now envisaged in the land acquisition bill seems to be going overboard, and that would render most big projects non-bankable.
Thank you very much, Professor. A question from our colleague Robin Jack. The question is, has there been any progress with the attempts to reintroduce land readjustment, town planning schemes, as practiced in Gujarat, as a way to finance infrastructure and to not disenfranchise existing landowners, as tends to happen with eminent domain. So the question on financing and again the linkage to land.
Hey Robin, great to hear a question from you. Now, TPS that you're talking about is something that actually was learned from us. Unfortunately, we've forgotten it. And unfortunately, again, I have to say that we are talking a little bit about it in seminars and so on, but nothing on the land, on the ground is happening by way of pooling lands and using it for infrastructure and leveraging it, etc. Largely because our data on land and public lands and so on, we require a land commission at some level because, Bombay Port Trust says it doesn't have any excess land. They have got great plans for it. Railways say the same thing. They don't pay property tax, etc. because that seems to be what happens everywhere in the world. So in this kind of a situation, we don't have proper cadastral maps or data and so on. Ownership is being litigated across different public arms. It's still a messy situation. Unless we get the data in place, which is happening, I'm told, we will not be able to get on with the TPS kind of thing that Robin is suggesting. But it is, I'm told, happening in Ahmedabad very successfully, but unfortunately not in Mumbai.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think the issue of data that has come up repeatedly throughout the questions and presentations, I think is a really important issue. And the next question is by Rakaba Neti. How can the infrastructure improvements in MMR, water, etc., cope with continued population growth? Is there any apprehension that increasing the FSI may cripple existing infrastructure, and so FSI reforms are not being tried out?
I think that is the official line that is taken in not increasing the FSIs, but I don't believe in it. You see, my point is FSIs need to be granular and they need to be increased in different places to different extent. What is happening today is they are being used as a source of revenue. So incentive FSIs are being granted, plus there is that madness called TDR, which is another planning tool which is used for raising revenue purposes, and therefore the whole development is becoming completely haphazard. FSIs are concerned. I think in reality, FSI increase has nothing to do with the infrastructure development which can be put in place, certainly in MMR. Because MMR, being the kind of influential economic powerhouse, does get treated in a special way. For example, Mumbai region has an islanding system for power. Mumbai gets its water from God knows 200 kilometers away and so on. So we are not going to starve because of these basic things. So there is no connect between FSI increase and infrastructure provisioning. We will need infrastructure provisioning to be done in the outside parts of MMR, and that would require empowerment of ULBs in those areas, or the ULBs to come together in a cartelized form and do something together, something that was tried out in Tamil Nadu, where under the water story that you read about from the TNUDF, where two urban places were connected and the intermediate villages were also given water. At no real incremental cost, but with certain conditions that you had to pay for your lunch. You can't get things for free, which hopefully our politicians will now stop doing less and less of.
Thank you very much, Professor. There's a question by Maclinda Kupoli with a question that she tries to relate to the government of Kosovo, and it goes to the issue of the design of grants. She says that the capital, they have a scheme where they want to allocate 3% of revenues as unconditional block grants, and she's asking if there is such a mechanism in Mumbai or Maharashtra, unconditional grants.
That is precisely why we had, under the 73rd, 74th constitutional amendment, we had what are called as the state finance commissions, whose job was to devolve a certain percentage of tax revenues down to the local bodies. These were non-planned revenue grants that had to go, which were untied. As I mentioned, there have been 3 state finance commissions. They have made certain recommendations of how to do it in a formulaic manner. They would be untied. None of the state governments in play at that time have accepted any of the financial awards. So currently, we don't have any untied grants, what can be called as devolution, happening. What is happening, of course, is a very small percentage is given to the local lower bodies to do planning, which are the plan grants. But the revenue or the non-plan grants are not simply forthcoming in any formulaic or untied manner in Maharashtra at least. Only in Kerala that happens, and a couple of other states where decentralization has really taken root. And there are reasons, but I don't think I want to go into them unless you want me to. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I think I would refer to our participants to the presentation by Anwar Shah, a very exhaustive, very good chapter in the book that has a very good analysis on grant design and compares several cities. We have time for just one more observation, a very provocative one by Richard Tomlinson. If land markets are made more efficient, won't this increase land values and displace slum dwellers? What do you think, Professor?
But that's precisely, I don't think, first of all, that will happen, because the land values currently so-called that are there are in a sort of an asset bubble. But even if that were to be true, I would still think that through regulatory intervention, that is the slum dwellers will not be able to afford it. But our vision of a good city is of a mixed city, not of a gated kind of gentrified city. In which case, we will be able to have policy design by which we would be able to have mixed housing and put the slum dwellers in an inclusive fashion, not maybe all of them, but some of them certainly. It would require some doing, yeah. Mm. Mm.
Thank you very much,
Absolutely.
Professor. Excellent observation and response. I was posed the same question in China once, and the question was, where do we put the poor people? And my response was everywhere. And it is the idea of an inclusive city and one that integrates everyone everywhere. Let me provide.
Well, the parting words are that I think governance, getting the governance right is the key, and protocols, processes, but also design of government and design of policy reform, and in a participatory fashion. I think I am a hopeless optimist anyway, but today I am even more optimistic because the kind of voters that we have, thanks to our demographic bulge that we are having, are young yuppies who are aspirational, and they will, I think, force the politicians to. So I think things will get better from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And we will be sending an email to everyone with a link of a page that will be opening up for continued debate and discussion and information on the issue of metropolitan finance as part of our Metropolitan Lab, our Metropolitan Lab. I also like to again thank the professor for the excellent presentation, all the participants. Invite everyone. February 19th, we will discuss one of the issues that came up in this webinar, the issue of property tax. The challenges the professor outlined in the transition to property tax are immense. at the same time. And on March 4th, we have Dr. Richard Bird discussing Metropolitan Governance, another important issue that was discussed and presented today in this webinar. So thanks to everyone. Exciting, great presentation, fantastic inquiries. We'll now have a small survey for you to please let us know how the technical aspects of the webinar worked, so we can do a better job next time. 19th. Thank you.